But 1.6 million of you last week watched as well as listened. It's hard to believe that I'm saying this, but I'm hoping that we can get to 2 million viewers by the end of this year. I bet you never thought you'd hear me saying that. When I think that this show started out on Talk Sport. Yeah, that's right. 14 years ago. It's been on WBAI in Wall Street in New York. And now it is on this vast global platform, thanks to RT and to SputnikNews.com. 1.6 million. Utterly dwarfing any other show of its kind anywhere in the world ever in history, certainly in the Western world. And that's significant because it means that those looking for an alternative take on events, those looking to question more, those looking to get to the truth through the fog of propaganda, which is deliberately thrown up by those whose purpose in life is not to find the truth, not to illuminate the true reality of events, but to serve their corporate masters. Corporate masters, we have none. And so we can forensically shine a light where others would prefer that it remained in darkness. I'm going to talk for most of my monologue about the truly horrific individual act of terrorism, of murder most foul, that took place this week in France, where a young school teacher was beheaded in broad daylight, outside a school, in front of the whole school community, in front of the parents, in front of the children, for the crime of offending somebody's religious sensibilities. This is even more of a paradox in France than it would be in other Western European countries, because France is an avowedly secular country. It is constitutionally bound to secularism. It's also constitutionally bound to the principle of free speech. Not that it lives up to it all of the time, but it is constitutionally bound to it. But mind you, so is the United States of America. This young man showed some of the pupils in his class the controversial cartoons, including cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad that had been published in Charlie Hebdo, and which has caused the shedding of a river of blood through France and elsewhere, but we're concentrating on France for the moment. He asked all of the Muslim children to leave the classroom before he showed them. He asked the Muslims to leave because, and I quote him, he didn't want to hurt their feelings. So he asked all of the Muslims to leave, and he showed the other children the cartoons about which all the fuss was about. I wish those cartoons had never been drawn. I wish Charlie Hebdo had never published them. I wish that we could turn a page on this whole episode. But what I cannot accept, and will not allow you to accept without having my say, is the idea that people can be murdered over a cartoon. That people can be murdered for showing people a cartoon that has become one of the biggest political issues in France. After all, the teacher, Mr. Lampy, was actually teaching free speech. He was teaching the principles of free speech. And Mr. Patty, rather, could not possibly teach free speech without dealing with the elephant in the room, which is these cartoons. An 18-year-old Chechen political refugee born in Moscow, in exile in France, with his extremist Islamist family and a huge community of extremist Islamist fanatics from Chechnya and indeed from elsewhere were given succor and comfort in France, in the Republic, a republic constitutionally bound to secularism, constitutionally bound to freedom of speech. They fled, they said, Russian persecution of the fundamentalist branch of Islamist fanaticism that their family adhered to. You might have thought, therefore, they felt a certain gratitude to the French Republic for giving them safe haven from that President Putin and his government that was cracking down on the Islamist fanatics. But no. An 18-year-old Chechen fanatic cut the head of young Mr. Paty, a school teacher, in broad daylight. Now, there have been other murders in France over Charlie Hebdo and other things. There have even been other beheadings. But there has never been a murder or a beheading likely to have more extremely serious political consequences, some of which I'm glad, some of which I'm sad. But no one should underestimate the impact on French society that this murder most foul has caused. It has, first of all, rallied the people of the French Republic behind their constitution and its secularism and its commitment to freedom of speech. Secondly, it has actually given critical mass to a very large number of people in France, usually rallying behind what is called the Front National, or whatever its current incarnation, but the far right in France will be the main beneficiaries of this murder most foul. It has caused a rally behind the narrative that there are too many Muslims in France, that too many concessions have been made to them, and that new changes need to occur in France to deal with what is clearly a significant and present danger to the way of life of the French by an enemy within. This is serious stuff, and may very well lead to terrorist action by retaliation against the Muslim community in France. Some of these changes of pace, changes of narrative will be positive. Others will be negative. But here's one that hasn't yet emerged, but must. And you'll only hear this here. This is not moral relativism. It's not look over there to avoid looking here. I want to see every last Al-Qaeda and ISIS cadre, fighter, terrorist lying dead on the streets, wherever they are to be found. There is nobody on the left or on the right more committed than me to the crushing of this excrescence which purports to act for and speak for the Muslim people and their religion of Islam. I am a hammer of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But I cannot avoid making this point, though some of you will not like it. You cannot have a situation where France and Britain and the United States is at war with these people on their own streets, but arming and funding them on other people's streets. That won't wash. Not least because if you've read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, You'll already know that Frankenstein's monster was called a monster for a reason. That once constructed, it was out with the control of its constructor. The same is true of the Islamist monster, which Western countries, including France, have fashioned and funded and weaponized and sent to war in other people's countries, because once you've fashioned them, you no longer control them, and they end up not just there, but here. They end up not just on other people's streets, but on your streets. And that's exactly what happened to our children at the Manchester Arena when a Libyan version of this Chechen monster came back to the country which had given him harbor to mutilate and murder our young children at an Ariana Grande concert. That's exactly what happened on London Bridge, on Westminster Bridge, on 100, 1,000 other terrorist occasions. That's exactly what happened. The monsters that we had created in the 1980s in Afghanistan, for that's when this weaponization of Islamist fanaticism began. These monsters that we created are now murdering us, murdering our school teachers, murdering our children, murdering anyone that they can reach with their knives, with their cars, with their bombs, with their guns. These monsters were made by us. Not us, not him, not our poor school teacher, not by the children in the Ariana Grande concert, but us, our countries, our states, our governments. In Syria, France, Britain, and the United States have fashioned an army of hundreds of thousands of people like that Chechen terrorist who now lies dead on the streets of France. And the beheading of that school teacher is repeated every day in Syria and has been for now almost an entire decade. Bread knives, axes, swords have severed the heads and carved open the chests, and the eating of hearts has been the reality of Syria for almost 10 years. And we are the people who gave them the knives, gave them the swords. Us, France, and the United States of America. And so I'm appealing to the French government as it introspectively considers what it needs to change in the wake of Monsieur Paty's foul murder, to consider this, that you can't back monsters abroad and expect that they will not be visiting you at home. In my famous lift conversation with William Hague, then the British Foreign Secretary, when he and I were trapped, imagine, together, just me and him, in a lift in the Houses of Parliament, I told him this: it's not that you've not been wrong before. In fact, you've been wrong all your life. But you've never been insane before. But your policy of giving knives to every Islamist fanatic that you can recruit and sending them to fight in Syria is literally insane. Insane if it works, because it will lead to an ISIS, Al-Qaeda state on the Mediterranean, right next to Israel. What could possibly go wrong? and insane if it fails, because these people and their knives that we gave them will be back here before you can say Jack Robinson. And I said to him, they'll even be in this building, William, looking for you and looking for me. And so it came to pass. So the French, in their grief, have my unqualified sympathy and condolences. I myself feel bereft at the murder of this young man and at the scarring of the lives of all the young children that witnessed it. I myself say unequivocally that we have to crush this excrescence. We have to eliminate it. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to defend ourselves here against them at home, but we've got to stop supporting them abroad. You see, Russia was right to try and destroy Chechen Islamist fanaticism, and we should have supported them in it. Syria was right in seeking to resist ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the alphabet soup of Islamist extremism in Syria, and we should have supported them. And if we had, maybe some of our own children, our own citizens, would not today be in the cold earth.